So we saw the notation, the different types of the different types of symbols we use for representing different concepts. We saw many examples. Then specially we discussed ternary relationships and how we have to take adequate care in modeling complex relationships, and we saw that ternary relationships cannot be replaced by two binary relationships. So they must be properly understood, properly analyzed, and also verified that our model of a relationship is correct. We then saw the concept of weak entities, and we said that the weak entities are encountered quite frequently, and generally they depend on some strong entities, and they can be defined in the context of some stronger entity. We will now continue with the extended ER model, and after that we will move on to process modeling. So let us now discuss the extended ER model, in which last time we had said that primarily the intention is to provide more semantics, more concepts for capturing the real world in its full meaning. We specially have new concepts, namely the generalization, aggregation, and subset hierarchies, which is also called specialization. And we will find that some of these concepts are quite closely related to the concepts in object oriented paradigm, and they relate to inheritance in particular and also to composite objects. Let us first study the generalization. The idea here is to find out from the entities that we have already identified whether something can be factored out as a common element. So it's possible that you might have defined two or more entities and you see that there is some common aspects to those, and you would like to extract that common aspect into an entity by itself. This is called generalization. Here is an example. Suppose we have identified two entities and we have called them as faculty entity and non-faculty entity. The purpose could be that faculty entity participates in taking courses, so we treat it as a separate entity. Then we also have non-faculty who do not teach courses, so we have defined these two entities. Looking at these entities and their attributes, we find that they also have a lot of common attributes, and there may be some applications where the two of them are treated together. For example, a payroll application. Payroll application naturally will have to make salary payments to both faculty and non-faculty. So in that case, they might need to be considered together. So we find that these two entities have some common elements, and we would like to generalize these two and create a new entity possibly called employee. So we say that employee is a generalization of the two entities faculty and non-faculty. We started by saying that these were the two entities we had identified earlier, and then considering the application context, we find a lot of commonness among them, and that commonness we have extracted into a general entity called employee entity. In this case, the common attributes which are present at both the faculty and the non-faculty level are extracted and are factored out. These common attributes are treated as the attributes of the general entity employee. These attributes, for example, could be the employee identification, employee name, date of joining, basic pay rate. These are attributes which will apply to both faculty as well as non-faculty, and these can be extracted and defined at the level of the employee itself. Now there may be some attributes which are applicable to faculty but not applicable to non-faculty, and vice versa. So these specific or non-common attributes are left with the original entities. So the common attributes are extracted and defined at the general level, and the specific attributes are left with the specific entities. Such a generalization is also known as is a relationship. So we will have a notation which is somewhat similar to the notation of relationship, but here the relationships would be named as is a relationship, and we will see some examples of that. Here is the example we were discussing, where we started by saying that we have the faculty entity and we have the non-faculty entity, and they had some common attributes. These common attributes have been extracted and we have created a general entity, a more generalized entity called employee, and the common attributes have been identified here. These include the employee number, which is the key attribute itself. Then we have the basic salary and the joining date. These are applicable to both the faculty as well as non-faculty, therefore they have been pulled out here. The non-common attributes are left with the entities. So faculty has attributes such as rank, department, research area, whereas non-faculty have rank, grade and the section in which they work. And the fact that we have started with these entities, faculty and non-faculty, and from here we have extracted and we have created the employee as a more general entity, is indicated by the is a relationship between these entities, and the direction of arrows indicate the direction of generalization. So we have generalized and created the employee entity from these two entities. So note here that the is a relationship is shown as a triangle with the words is a written, and the direction of arrows is from more specific entities to the more generalized entity. This is the notation that we use for generalization. Here is one more example. The example where we have two types of accounts, a saving account and current account. Many of you would know that these are the accounts which you can open in the banks, and they have a few different attributes, but there are few attributes which are also common. The common attributes have been extracted into a general entity called account, and the account has attributes account number, the holder of the account and the balance in the account. Whereas the non-specific attributes, the non-common attributes which are specific to these entities have been left here. So saving account has the interest rate attribute and the current account has a overdraft limit attribute. So these are the specific attributes, and the common attributes are defined at the level of the generic entity. And again here you see that we have named the relationship is A, and you can read it in this way: savings account is a account, current account is a account. That is why the direction of reading is implied, and the is a relationship reads in this way, that we are saying that a specific entity such as the saving account is also an account. So this is the generalization example. Now let us consider the specialization example, which is the reverse of generalization. This is also called subset hierarchy. Here we start with an entity, and then we find that we can create some special cases of that entity, so that we can prepare better ER diagram and we can indicate the roles that those special entities play. Now here is an example. Let us assume now that we have created the employee entity. We find that there are certain type of employees whom we may want to distinguish. So we create another special case of the employee entity called teacher. So here we begin with employee, then we find that there are some special employees who need to be treated differently in our model. So one reason why we want to separate teachers from other employees and treat it as a special case is because we may want to define the teaching relationship where only teachers teach courses. So teacher, we say, is a special case of employee. We started by identifying employee as an entity in our real world, and then we created teacher as a special case. Here the employee is called superset and teacher is called subset, or they are also called super type and subtype. In general, an entity E1 is called as a subset of some other entity E if every instance of E1 is also an instance of E. We also call this relationship as a is a relationship. Now what it means is that every teacher has to be employee. That is, every instance of teacher is also an instance of employee. There cannot be a teacher who is not an employee. Of course, the other case may hold that there may be employees who are not teachers. So the reverse is not implied. So every entity E1 which is a subset, every occurrence of such entity E1 must also be an occurrence of E. Every instance of E, on the other hand, need not be subset of E. That means every employee need not be a teacher, whereas every teacher must be an employee. This is a special case, means that teacher is a special case of employee. Being a special case, that there may be more employees who are not teachers, but every teacher has to be employee. This is the precise meaning of specialization. Specialization allows classification of an entity into different subsets based on some important attributes. It allows us to categorize a given entity into different types or different classes so that they can be treated differently in the remaining part of the model. We may have in fact several classifications or several specializations of the same entity based on different attributes. The subsets may have additional attributes. So just as we create teacher as a subset of employee, we may want to give some additional attributes to teacher which do not apply to other employees. So these will be the additional attributes. Here is the example of the specialization. Now remember that here we start our modeling by identifying the employee as a entity. Then we consider in the further modeling that different employees need to be treated differently. So we identify the attributes which define that basis. So here we have two categorizations. It's possible that employees are treated differently for payroll depending on whether they are permanent employees or temporary employees. So we have a specialization of employee into two categories, permanent employee and temporary employee, and an attribute such as basic salary may apply to permanent employee, whereas daily rate may pertain to temporary employee. Whereas there are some common attributes to both type of employees, employee number, employee name and the address. So this is one way of classifying employees. The other way could be based on their function, based on the type of work they do. So here we have created now another specialization into categories called faculty, clerk and technician. We have also identified a few attributes. For faculty we have rank and area of research. For clerk we may have typing speed. For technician we may have skill code. Now always remember that we do specialization or generalization with some objective in mind. You do this classification for some purpose. It's possible that you would define a relationship between faculty and a course called teach relationship. Now it is best to create the teach relationship with faculty and not with the employee, because there are some employees who don't teach. So the purpose of this specialization therefore is to indicate additional behavior or some specific behavior of these specialized entities. And you also identify attributes which are meaningful. Remember that what we said earlier, that every employee need not fall into the categories given here. Every faculty obviously is an employee. This is the way you read the relationship, faculty is a employee. But in the case of specialization, every employee need not be the categories you have defined. What it means is that we may have an employee who is neither faculty nor clerk nor technician. He has a role which is not relevant for our modeling, so we have not identified additional roles. It's possible that only these three roles are meaningful to us in the model that we are creating. Whereas in this case, we have some employees who are permanent employees, some who are temporary, and it is possible that these two categories cover all the employees, and there are no employees who are left out, because they are the binary classification, either it has to be permanent or it has to be temporary. There is nothing other than these two. So this classification is complete, whereas this classification may not be complete. So specialization is going from an entity and creating special categories, whereas generalization is going from a given set of entities and finding out what is common and extracting it and defining that as a general kind of an entity. Note the difference in the notation also. In the case of generalization, we had arrows pointing towards general entity, and here we have the classification or specialization going from top to down kind of a direction. Let us examine these two concepts, generalization and specialization, in the context of a concept in object orientation, the concept of inheritance. How are these two concepts related with inheritance? Obviously, we see that there is an inheritance implied here from the superclass or the generalized class to the special cases, because the common attributes are defined at the general level and specific attributes are defined at a specialized level. So naturally, the attributes at the generic level are inherited by the entities which are at the next level. So there is an inheritance. The attributes are inherited by the more specialized entities from the base entity. So the subclass or subset automatically inherits the attributes defined at the superclass and superset level. So there is an inheritance in both the cases, whether it is a generalization or whether it is a specialization. The attributes of the generic entity are inherited by the subclass or the subset entity. So inheritance is present in both these cases. However, the direction of inheritance or the direction in which we have created the model is an important difference, and that is why we have distinguished generalization from specialization. We do generalization in the bottom up direction. We have gone from more specialized entities and created a general entity. Whereas in the case of specialization, we started with an entity and created specific cases of that entity. It is important to distinguish between these two cases. Now let us next examine the concept of aggregation. Aggregation is used for building complex entities from existing entities or possibly existing entities and relationships between them. So we are creating a complex entity and that would be called as an aggregated entity. There are two ways by which we can do that. We can create an attribute whose value itself is another entity. Usually we have talked about attributes and we said that attributes have values, and so far we have seen attributes which are primarily simple attributes like age or roll number or hostel number, but there can be attributes whose value is itself an entity. For example, when a student studies a course and let us say he has a course attribute. Now what is the value of this course attribute? We can say course attribute value is CS101, which is the course code, but that is not the same thing as saying course as a value. So when we say that the whole course itself is a value, then we say that the attribute in this case is an attribute whose value is another entity, the course entity in this case. So in this case, we are creating a complex entity with values as entities themselves. The second example is when we create an entity from a existing set of entities which you may have already identified. So you club them together and create a more complex entity. So we'll see an example of the second case. Consider the example of a work order. Now work order is something which, let's say, a company or an organization receives, and it is supposed to manufacture that particular item for a given customer. Now when a work order is received, the work order will need to be translated into some raw materials and tools which will be worked upon by the workers to create that particular piece of product. So a work order is primarily represented in terms of three basic entities: the raw material, tools and workers. So it's really a complex entity, and that complex entity is formed by a relationship between raw material, tools and workers. But on the other hand, the work order itself has to be treated as an entity because it is related to customer entity. So customer would be shown as having a relationship, a binary relationship with the work order. The work order itself will get decomposed into entities showing its relationship to raw material, tools and workers. Work order also may have some useful attributes for itself, like a work order number or the quantity in which the customer has ordered that particular product. Now we want to show this in the form of a ER diagram, some suitable notation. Unfortunately, there is not any standard notation provided for this. We will see an example which we can use for representing aggregation. So here is the work order, which is represented as a large rectangle, and that large rectangle itself consists of a small ER diagram on its own, defining the relationship between the raw material entity, the tools entity and the worker entity. So this complex object has two attributes, job number and quantity. Note that these attributes are connected to the outer rectangle. They are not connected to these inner entities which form the complex or the aggregate entity. Now this work order is related to customer through a binary relationship. So in this example, we are showing an aggregate entity like this, which can further participate in additional relationships and which has its own attributes. Let us now take a more complex and complete exercise. There is a statement of the problem given here. It is concerned with postgraduate studies. I will show you a very concise description of the problem in this case. You should remember that this concise description has been prepared possibly as a result of analysis that we must have done during the analysis phase, and we condense it in the form of a brief statement so that we can analyze it for identifying the required data model. So this should be read carefully and should be understood. Since it comes from a university environment, I expect all of you would be somewhat familiar with this. We have students who join a particular specialization that may be offered by a department. So we have an academic institute such as IIT, which has many departments, and these departments offer specializations at the postgraduate level. A specialization with same title may be offered by different departments independently. Teachers are appointed to a specific department and they have a room and telephone number. Departments have some teacher as its head. Courses are offered under various specializations. A teacher may teach many courses and a course may be taught by many teachers. At postgraduate level, this is quite common that a course is taught jointly. A student studies a course under a teacher during some semester, and these semesters are distinguished from each other. So, we have semester 1 of 2003, then there may be semester 2 and so on. So, these semesters are also properly identified and the students are given a grade in every course. Teachers have research interests. These research interests may lie in one or more specializations, and courses may have 0 or more prerequisites. So, this is a general statement of the problem. Now, this is to some extent ready-made for preparing a ER model. Preparing such concise descriptions is always very challenging and needs a good understanding of the problem domain. So, after you have done analysis phase, you develop this understanding, you put it in the form of a concise description so that it can be converted into a data model. You should try doing this exercise yourself. However, we will show you a solution here, and hopefully the solution that you come up with should be somewhat similar. Here is the solution, and I will point out some basic entities and relationships which you can check with the description that we have just now seen. Here we have a department entity, and departments offer specializations. Now, specializations here are shown as weak entities which depend on the departments. Now, this will take care of specializations which are named similarly. So, we will now know that in what context it can be treated on its own, that a specialization such as microcomputers may be offered by electrical department, which is different from same specialization offered by, let us say, computer science department. So, the weak entity would nicely capture this requirement. Then we have teachers. Teachers are working for departments, and one teacher may also head the department. So, that is shown as a different relationship. And these teachers also have research interests. So, we have a direct relationship from teacher to specialization, and this naturally would be one to many type of relationship. It will permit teachers to have many specializations, possibly across departments. Then we have courses which are offered under different specializations. We have student entity, we have teacher entity, already we saw that, and we have created semester as an entity. So, the study relationship in this case has been defined as a four-way relationship, which is between student, semester, teacher and course. Here the study relationship has the grade attribute. So, now this study relationship will permit a student to enroll in different courses which are taught by multiple teachers in different semesters, and if the student fails, he can possibly repeat that course in another semester. So, this would be permitted by our model here, and here we have student enrolling in specific specializations. So, in this case we have all the main entities, we have the various relationships which are indicated in the scenario, and a few important attributes are shown. I will leave you with a few more exercises where you are expected to prepare the ER models, and if you have studied the database systems, you can try converting these ER models into a database design. So, I will just give a few examples, just give them briefly. Hopefully, they are familiar situations, and you would be able to expand on them and create an interesting problem where you would be able to apply the ER modeling concepts properly. The first example is the railway reservation, where we permit reservations to be done in advance. We have trains that go to various stations. We have quotas on various trains for various stations. A train, when it is scheduled to run, has some coaches. These coaches are identified as you typically would have seen. You have sleeper coaches identified as S1, S2, S3, so on. So these coaches would have the passenger lists associated with them. They have certain capacities against which the people make reservations. We have people who are booked for the various train journeys. They are given tickets. A ticket might list one or more passengers. Tickets may be confirmed tickets, they may be wait listed tickets, and so on. So these are different things that we would like to cover in the railway reservation situation. You should prepare a short description of what we would like the reservation system to handle. For example, we have not listed here cancellations, but they should also be forming an important part. So based on this, then you can try identifying the entities, relationships, even the generalizations and specializations if they are applicable. There is another example of a old car mart which buys and sells old cars, and the cars are either purchased directly from the people and they are sold to people. All the data has to be kept, and we may sell the cars either on full payment or on installment basis. We also provide service to cars. We may do some pre-sale repairs. We have commission agents who help us in buying. So this is a small, let's say small second-hand car dealer who would like you to develop a data model so that an application can be developed. We then take another example which many of you would naturally have a lot of interest in, is the cricket database. In this case, we would like to store data about various matches which are played between countries over a period of time. So we have countries represented by players, and the countries have teams which keep changing from time to time, and matches are arranged. Then every match may have some result, and we keep record of scores. Now, of course, the scores can be very detailed, but in this case, let's say that we would like to know for each player and in each role that he has played as either bowler or batsman, what is the aggregate score that he achieved. And we prepare an ER model, and I would like you to also prepare some sample data to validate your model, to create some instance diagrams to illustrate your ER model. So these different exercises you should try to do, because data modeling is very fundamental. Given an ER diagram done by somebody else, it's easy to read, but it's very challenging to prepare one on your own, even in these popular situations such as cricket database or railway reservation system. These are familiar examples, and you will still find that it's quite challenging to prepare a good ER model which can be understood by somebody else without any explanation from you. In fact, that is a very critical test of how good your model is. You should not be required to explain to somebody else what your entities mean and what relationships mean. In fact, the names and the constraints that you represent in your ER model should be straightforward to understand once the person who is looking at your model is familiar with the problem you are trying to solve. So, a real test of your ER model would be its understandability by a third person, and of course, with reference to the scope that you would have defined in a short description. Let us now summarize. We have seen data modeling as a very important element of understanding a user application. We identify the different components and understand relationships between the concepts that we find in a given application. ER model is a conceptual model, and that is what we develop first. We try to understand the data domain or the information domain of a given application at the conceptual level. At this point, we are not concerned with implementing this on a computer system. The ER model uses very intuitive kind of concepts. Those are entity, relationship and attribute. They are straightforward to understand, and they are also straightforward to communicate with others. It also provides a number of constraints by which we can define clearly the meaning of data as it should be in a given situation, and these were the concepts of primary key, cardinalities of the relationships and so on. It has a very simple diagramming notation, that is the strength of the ER model, and it can be understood easily by the users, and that would be very helpful to us in validating our model. So, ER model is extensively used by analysts and even by designers as a first step towards the design of a data model or a database solution. Let us next study process modeling. As we had said earlier also, there are two types of models we generally make while carrying out the analysis of a given application, that is the data modeling and then process modeling. We have already seen data modeling. We will now get into the details of process modeling. Here we will talk about the process decomposition as one of the important step in handling complex processes, and we will also see a diagramming notation for representing decomposition of a process. And then we will talk about the data flow diagrams, which are the important notation available for representing complex processes. In fact, that would be the thrust of this module. So, after studying the process decomposition diagrams, we will look at data flow diagrams in details. Now, let us first understand the process model. A process is a business activity which, when executed, produces the required outputs. So, it takes a few inputs, carries out some processing on them and produces some meaningful output. And we say that a process represents some kind of a business activity. For example, the process may be for reservation of a ticket, or the process may correspond to registering for a course. So, these are business activities and each one can be treated as a process. The function performed by a process could be quite complex and may need multiple inputs and may have more than one output, and there may be many users involved in a given process itself. So, processes can be simple to complex. The entire application which we are trying to develop itself can be treated as a process, because it has certain inputs, certain outputs, and it performs some processing. So, the whole application itself can be treated as a process. We try to handle complexity by successively decomposing a given process into sub-processes. So, the main idea in the process modeling is to decompose a process into smaller processes or sub-processes, and in the process we reveal more and more details of what happens inside that process. So, if we say that there is a process called reserving a ticket, then what are the sub-processes in that? For example, checking availability on a particular date of travel is a sub-process. So, we identify sub-processes given in a process. This is called the function decomposition. Decomposition splits the work of a task into subtasks. So, we have a task which has some overall objective, and we break that into subtasks. When we do that, what we are saying is that these subtasks taken together do what the parent task is required to do. So, the subtasks really add up, they make up the parent task. We must distinguish this situation from the structure chart kind of a situation or programming kind of a situation, where you have one program calling a subroutine or a program calling a module to do some other work. Here, in fact, the decomposition replaces a task by the collection of its subtasks. So, this is really the splitting of a task. We generally try to do a very balanced decomposition. So, when you start, you have a complex task at hand, and in order to identify its subtasks, you will decompose it into 2 or more. Now, the question would be how many subtasks you should break it into, or how they match with each other in the complexity. Suppose you take a task T1 and you break it into 2, T1 1 and T1 2. Now, we expect that roughly these T1 1 and T1 2 would be similar in complexity. It should not happen that out of the 2, one does very little and all the other is expected to be done by the second. So, it should be a well balanced decomposition where the subtasks are broken into roughly equal complexity subtasks. We start from a given task and continue decomposition. This is the top down decomposition which produces a hierarchical structure. A hierarchical structure is a level by level structure. At the topmost level, you will have the single process, and the next level it shows its sub processes. Then one of those sub processes may be further decomposed. This gives you a tree type of a structure or a hierarchical structure. You generally decompose into 2 or more, but a thumb rule is not to decompose a task into more than 5, because our ability to comprehend more than 5 things at a time is limited. So, we generally try to decompose a task into up to 5 subtasks, roughly of similar complexity. While doing this, the 2 principles which we should keep in mind are the high cohesion and minimum coupling. Each subtask should be a well defined subtask, should have precise goal, and should have maximum independence. It should be as independent of the other subtasks as possible. That is the principle of high cohesion. And the next is minimum coupling. That means the subtasks should have minimum interdependence among themselves. So, high cohesion and minimum coupling are fundamental criteria of decomposing anything complex into its subtasks. We continue this decomposition process until we identify elementary processes. These elementary processes are fairly simple and straightforward, and we generally would not require any further decomposition of these. An elementary process can be defined as the smallest unit of meaningful activity. So, the users would consider them as a well defined smallest piece of action, and in terms of relating it to database state, we can say that these elementary processes see the data in consistent state, and when they are finished, they leave the data in the consistent state. So, they do not introduce any inconsistency after they finish their task. So there are situations where it may not always be so. Consider the example of a bank. When you transfer money from one account to another, there are two steps here. You reduce one account and you credit another account. Now both of them have to be done together, otherwise the data would be in inconsistent state. Money would have been reduced but would not have been credited. So elementary process would be a fund transfer process. You are transferring money from one account to another. You cannot, or you would not like to decompose it further, because the whole thing has to be taken as a single activity which sees the data in consistent state when it starts execution, and when it finishes execution it leaves the data in the consistent state. We now have seen that a process would be decomposed, and we will do decomposition at multiple levels till we reach elementary processes. So a diagram can be used for representing this decomposition. It would be having structure of a tree, and we will have these elementary processes at the leaf level. In doing the process decomposition diagram, we only are showing activities. We are not showing any data in these diagrams. So remember that process decomposition diagram is only giving decomposition of the various processes. Here is a fairly simple example of a functional decomposition diagram. The process that we want to consider is the process called student registration. Now student registration may be a fairly complex process. So we are dividing it into three sub processes. One called register for backlog courses. So if a student has any failed courses in the past, he must first register for them. Then he must register for prescribed courses, and then the third subtask is to get the registration approved. So student registration consists of these three processes: backlog registration, prescribed course registration, and approval of the registration by the faculty advisor of the student. So student registration process can be decomposed into three sub processes. Here is another example, the example of inventory control. In the inventory control, an organization wants to ensure that the stocks that it keeps in its warehouse are of appropriate quantity. So it has to manage that inventory. So how does it do that? The inventory control is a complex process consisting of 4 sub processes that we have identified. So control inventory can be replaced by these 4 sub processes, or we can say that this control inventory is equivalent to doing these 4 sub processes. The first of them is predicting the demand. Then there is a sub process called forecast stock levels. Then the third sub process is check the inventory, and the next process is to determine what quantities to order. So reordering, checking inventory, forecasting stock levels, predicting demand, these 4 sub activities make the overall activity of control inventory. So what we do in the process decomposition or function decomposition is to look at a process, study what happens in that, and then identify the sub processes which taken together indicate what really happens in this process. So it gives a better understanding of what is required in control inventory. We need to carry out these subtasks. That is what the function diagram represents. Here is a small exercise. You can prepare such functional decomposition diagrams for some common situations, again something which are quite well familiar to you. What would be a function decomposition diagram for railway reservation system, for a hospital patient management system, for the payroll system of employees? So in each of these cases try to create the scenarios for these applications and prepare the function decomposition diagrams for them. Now some general guidelines of preparing the function decomposition model. Use proper naming of processes. This is very important because through proper naming you are conveying the purpose of a process. Business functions are generally named as nouns. These could be marketing, inventory control and so on. These are typical business functions and we use nouns for representing them, and it should be either a single word or a simple phrase such as marketing or inventory control. On the other hand, processes are named consisting of active verb followed by an object, because process represents some action. Therefore, we have a verb representing that action, and action is having some purpose. It has a target. We represent that as an object. So, accept order, calculate interest are good examples of process names. Now, the names should be concise. They should be simple phrases, or best it would be if it is a single word. You should avoid long names, or do not describe a process in the box that you are preparing for representing that process. Anytime you use words such as and, if, then, etc., it clearly is an indication that it is a complex process and you have not done the decomposition which is cohesive and with minimum coupling. So, you must avoid long names. So, you need to give a good thought about the naming of these processes. Real world is a good reference for selecting the proper names. Very often organizations have subdivisions and these subdivisions carry some names. They are a good source of identifying proper names for our processes. So, naming is the most important and a challenging task in a properly defined function decomposition diagram. Let us conclude this lecture with an example. This problem I had mentioned earlier as an exercise for you. Let me illustrate a possible solution to this problem. This is a familiar problem of a railway reservation that I mentioned earlier, and I want to illustrate the typical mistakes we make in function decomposition. So, let us look at an example that I have here. We have a railway reservation system as a function to be implemented. This is the root function which we want to decompose, and here you see some decomposition that has been shown. There is a get travel details as a sub function of this. Get another function is compute the fare, the third sub function is print ticket and so on. Now, as you see here, we are identifying some sub functions which are required in the railway reservation system, but when we look at these are some small functions which come to our mind and we start writing them without considering whether they are forming a proper part of the whole, and whether the guidelines that we had mentioned earlier, that the functions, the sub functions that you prepare should be of roughly same complexity. Moreover, they should add up to the main function which we are decomposing. Now, as you see here, these functions like get travel details, compute fare, print ticket, etc., these definitely will be required, but they are almost like random thoughts and we do not know in what way they add up and what is left out here. We need to properly decompose the railway reservation system function at a higher level and not directly jump into some minor functions which do something very specific. So, individually they may be still very cohesive, but they are at a very lower level of granularity, and they are much they are very small subtasks which need not come at the next level of decomposition itself. At the next level we should have a larger breakdown of this overall task, where the subtasks will be of sufficient complexity, but they would represent a first level of decomposition appropriately. So this does not seem to be a right type of decomposition as the next level of decomposition. So let us look at another alternative, which is shown here. We have now the railway reservation system, which has been decomposed into 4 sub processes, and when we read them, we will find that these 4 together cover everything that we have in mind about the railway reservation system. So the first one is a sub function which says maintain data about the trains. Now this is something which will be required, and this contains all the trains, their stations, fare details, the sizes of these trains in terms of type of coaches and number of coaches that they have. All this data needs to be maintained, and we can define one sub function for that. The second one is about reservation of the ticket. We do not go right away into the details of like printing a ticket or computing a fare at this point, but we first decompose it at a higher level called reserve ticket. Then we have a cancel ticket function, and then we have output and reports sub function. In this, we will include various type of reports that need to be prepared. These could be reports about accounting. These could be reports which represent routine outputs, giving the coach charts that we put up at the outside the gate of the coach, where you list the names of passengers who have bookings on that particular coach. So all these outputs and reports can be delegated to a separate sub function, and these outputs and reports will be obtained at a specific point in time. For example, the coach charts will be printed just 1 hour before the train journey begins. So this way, if you look at all these 4 functions, we see that collectively they perform all the tasks that are implied by the railway reservation system. So this is the first level of decomposition. It's complete at this level. At every level of decomposition, the 2 levels should match in terms of functions that they perform. Now let's take one of these for further decomposition. So let's take reservation of a ticket as a function to be decomposed further, and this decomposition is shown in a separate diagram here. So we are now decomposing the reserve ticket sub process, which was identified in the previous diagram. Now we are decomposing it into only 2 subtasks here called allocate and ticketing. As the name suggests, the purpose of allocate is depending on the preferences and the number of passengers listed, the date of journey, etc. This function will take all that and give an allocation for that particular request, and then this is the ticketing function. So we see that here we have decomposed it further into get and validate data, check availability on the train, assign seats, and so on. So this is the way at every level you should decompose a function and ensure that it matches perfectly with the level at the earlier level function. So I would urge you to try out many such examples so that you understand and you can use this function decomposition notion very well, because this is a basis for developing models subsequently.